Bill White's Midday Rant is a short, sharp take on what's happening and how it relates to you. Agree or disagree? Listen to middayrant.com today.
You really have to admire the Obama-Biden administration. These liars have spent the last 5 years telling Americans and anyone else who would listen one bogus story after another. And while not the actual genesis of their disinformation campaign, as far as most people were aware, the big push began as President Trump came down the escalator. Since then, we've been fed one false narrative after another, and corporate media has run with those lies, describing them as fact even when there was no evidence to support them or when all the available evidence refuted the left's narrative. It's really quite extraordinary. You have to admire their chutzpah. Well, a few days ago, we learned that the Biden administration had created a Disinformation Governance Board headed by a high-profile proponent of a number of their false stories. Nina Jankowicz was appointed to be the executive director of the board, which is part of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. But her appointment to head this division of the agency is rather ironic because just a couple of years ago, on May 29, 2020, Jankowicz publicly stated that the executive branch of the government had no business policing information, an activity she described as anti-democratic. In 2017, she was a Fulbright Fellow in Kiev, working for Ukraine's Foreign Ministry. Jankowicz has also worked as a Disinformation Fellow at the Wilson Center, which is a quasi-government entity and think tank named for the Democrat president who displayed open contempt for the U.S. Constitution. And Jankowicz was the center's Russia and Belarus program supervisor. But now, as a member of the executive branch, Jankowicz has been granted, and I say an unconstitutional authority, to continue to show disdain for women, minorities, and anyone else who deviates from Wilson's view of the perfect citizen, but on a larger scale now and with the full force of the U.S. government behind her. But disinformation is really a misnomer. Information, whether it is true or false, intentionally or otherwise, is still information. And you can compare this to false information. The prefix dis indicates the opposite of the word that it precedes. And so in this case, leftists are using a made-up word that is inaccurate at best. False information is not disinformation. This is nothing new for Democrats, who are actively rewriting our language to confuse voters into unwittingly supporting their failed policies. Men are women, women are men, vaccines should no longer be expected to prevent infection or transmission, and inflation is good, to name only a few. Under Democratic control, language is subject to change, and it does change on a daily basis to conceal their failures. I could go on for an hour or more listing all of the false narratives and bogus stories promoted by Democrats over the last 5 years, not to mention the actual true stories that these communists have censored or buried with the help of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, among the many news outlets, newspapers, and bogus fact-checkers, but it wouldn't make any difference now. As we know, the damage is already done, and that is precisely the problem. Democrats know that it doesn't matter whether or not their lies are exposed. They don't care if they're found out. They know that most people don't have the time or inclination to look for the truth, and even if they did, social media platforms and Google search use algorithms to keep the shell game going, distracting the public while they advance their narrative. So prepare yourself. Until November, and please God, may the Democrats lose the U.S. House and Senate. But until then, until that happens, and until President Trump retakes the White House, you can expect more of the same. Hopefully. And I say that because the problem of who counts the votes has still not been fixed. But let's just imagine their fraud doesn't work this time. And when President Trump is reelected, if the Democrats fail to achieve a repeat of the widespread fraud used to unseat him in 2020, you can absolutely guarantee that Democrats will be the first to decry this Disinformation Governance Board that they have created. Don't worry, the same useful idiots, the same race hucksters, the same communists who hate our country, its history, and the patriots who defend it will call this Disinformation Governance Board undemocratic again.